The giant snake uncoiled slowly, its glistening black scales shimmering like polished onyx in the dim light of the cave. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto the man standing before it. The fake pastor knelt immediately, a wide grin spreading across his face as he raised his hands in reverence. "O Great One, the King of the Shadows, the Fountain of Power, I bow before you with all my heart," he began, his voice trembling with exaggerated devotion. "You are the keeper of secrets and the giver of strength. Who can stand against your might? Not even the heavens dare challenge you." The snake's tongue flicked out, tasting the air as if savoring his words. The pastor took it as a sign to continue. "This week has been extraordinary, all because of you," he gushed. "The whole state knows my name now. Testimonies are pouring in like rivers, and my church, your church, is now the largest in the entire region. They showed my services on national television. Millions watched me, Great One, and all the glory belongs to you." He reached for a large bag he had carried in, straining slightly under its weight. "As always, I have not come empty-handed. Here is your share, a token of my gratitude for your unmatched power." He placed the bag down gently, the sound of coins and crisp notes muffled inside. The snake hissed, its massive head looming closer to him. The pastor felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to maintain his smile. "I promise I will never fail you. As long as you give me power, I will keep delivering the offerings. Together we will conquer even more. The world will kneel before us." The snake stared at him for a long, tense moment before slowly retracting its head. The pastor sighed in relief, his mind already racing with plans for the next show of his so-called miracles. Prophet Caleb was no ordinary man. To his followers, he was a savior, a powerful man of God with a direct connection to heaven. His church, Thunder Power Ministry, was a place where miracles happened so often that people began calling it the House of Wonders. If you were sick, hopeless, or burdened, all you had to do was step into the church, and your problems would vanish. Every Sunday, 3 services were held, and each was filled to overflowing. People traveled long distances, leaving their homes, markets, and jobs behind, just to catch a glimpse of Prophet Caleb and experience his powerful prayers. From the moment the choir began to sing, the atmosphere in the church was electric, as if heaven itself had descended to earth. But there was something strange about Prophet Caleb, something no one could see. Hidden on his head was a mystical snake horn, invisible to the human eye. This horn was the source of his power, a gift or a curse, from a dark and secret world. Without the horn, Caleb was nothing more than an ordinary man. With it, he was a miracle worker, and no one in his congregation had any idea. During one memorable service, a woman burst into the church, carrying her blind 5-year-old son. She was desperate, her voice shaking as she cried out, "Prophet Caleb, please pray for my son. He has been blind since birth. Doctors say nothing can be done." The congregation held their breath as Prophet Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "Have faith," he said. "The power of God is here." He placed his hands over the boy's eyes, muttered a prayer, and stepped back. The boy blinked once, twice, then gasped, "Mama, I can see. I can see." The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping and shouting, "Glory to God." In another corner of the church, a man who had been in a wheelchair for 5 years stood up and began to walk. The congregation was stunned. Some cried, others sang praises, and many fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the miracles they were witnessing. "Prophet Caleb, you are truly sent by God," a man shouted. What the congregation didn't know was that the miracles were not from God. The power came from the horn on Prophet Caleb's head, and the rituals he performed in secret. But no one could see the horn. It was invisible to everyone except Caleb and those with special spiritual insight. The members of Thunder Power Ministry were so focused on the miracles that they didn't ask questions. They didn't notice the strange way Caleb's hands trembled when he finished praying. They didn't wonder why he always seemed to retreat to a locked room after every service, or why he avoided personal contact with most people. They only cared about one thing: the miracles. The fame of Thunder Power Ministry spread like wildfire. Markets would empty out during the church's weekly activities, as everyone flocked to hear Prophet Caleb. Two women at the marketplace chatted excitedly one afternoon. "Mama Chi, you didn't come to church last Sunday. You missed so much," said Mama Dan. "What happened? Tell me." "Ah, you should have seen it." A blind boy regained his sight, and a man in a wheelchair walked again. "So many testimonies. You must come this Sunday. Don't miss it." "I will be there early," Mama Chi promised. Nkechi had always been a curious woman. She was new to Thunder Power Ministry, but the stories she had heard were too incredible to ignore. People said that the blind regained their sight, the lame walked, and all kinds of sicknesses disappeared in this church. Skeptical yet intrigued, she decided to see for herself. On her first visit, the church was packed. There were so many people that she barely found a seat. The choir sang with such energy that it felt like the walls might shake. Testimonies began almost immediately, with people rushing to the altar to share their experiences. A woman sobbed as she told the congregation, "My daughter was deaf and dumb from birth, but now she can hear and speak." The girl, standing beside her, spoke some words. The crowd roared in joy, clapping and shouting praises to God. As Prophet Caleb stepped onto the pulpit, Nkechi's heart skipped a beat. There on his head she saw something impossible. Two long, glistening horns. A large snake at the altar. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the horns were still there. They shimmered faintly under the church's bright lights, curving upward like those of a ram. Her breath quickened as she watched him raise his hands to pray. Then something even more shocking happened. A large snake slithered out from behind the horns. It coiled itself on his head, its scales glinting like polished metal. Nkechi's hands flew to her mouth to stifle a scream. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself. She turned to the woman sitting next to her. "Excuse me, madam," she said, her voice shaking. "Can you see anything on Prophet Caleb's head?" The woman gave her a confused look. "What do you mean? He looks perfect, like an angel." Nkechi's heart raced. How could no one else see this? The horns and snake were so large, so obvious. It felt impossible that they could go unnoticed. Her curiosity turned into determination. She couldn't just sit there and ignore what she had seen. "I need to find out what's going on," she thought. By the next Sunday, Nkechi had taken the first step in her plan. She approached the ushering department after service and expressed her interest in joining. "I want to help, I want to serve in God's house," she said with a warm smile. "I love how organized this church is, and I want to be a part of it." The head usher, Sister Grace, was delighted to have a new recruit. She smiled and welcomed her warmly, not knowing Nkechi's true goal. Nkechi was quickly assigned a role. Her task was simple: direct visitors to their seats, assist with offerings, and ensure everything ran smoothly during services. Nkechi's new position gave her better access to Prophet Caleb. From her vantage point near the altar, she could watch him closely without drawing attention to herself. The next Sunday, Nkechi came prepared. She brought her phone, determined to capture proof of what she had seen. As the service progressed and Prophet Caleb began to pray, she discreetly raised her phone and snapped a photo. When she checked the picture, her heart sank. The horns and snake were nowhere to be seen. The prophet looked perfectly normal. She took another photo and then another, but the result was the same. "Why can I see it with my eyes but not in the picture?" she wondered. The questions in her mind multiplied. Could this be some kind of spiritual sight? Was she seeing something others couldn't because she was chosen to expose the truth? Or was she losing her mind? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Nkechi spent more time in the church. She stayed after services, observing everything and asking subtle questions. She noticed that Prophet Caleb always disappeared into a locked room after the service. No one else was allowed inside. One day, she turned to a fellow usher and asked casually, "What's in that room the prophet always goes into?" The usher shrugged. "I don't know. No one is allowed in there except him." As days turned into weeks, Nkechi's dreams became strange. She saw visions of a dark forest, where a snake coiled around a glowing horn. A deep voice whispered, "Do not meddle in what you do not understand." She would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. But instead of scaring her off, the dreams made her more determined. "If there's a dark secret here, it needs to be exposed," she thought. One evening, as Nkechi was leaving the church after a late-night prayer meeting, an old woman approached her. The woman's eyes were sharp, as though she could see into Nkechi's soul. "You see things others cannot," the woman said, her voice low. Nkechi froze. "What do you mean?" "The horns. A snake. You see them, don't you?" Nkechi's mouth went dry. "How do you know?" she whispered. The woman smiled sadly. "Because I saw them too for some time now." "Be careful, child. There is a price for seeing what others cannot." Before Nkechi could ask more, the woman turned and disappeared into the night. Nkechi's curiosity about Thunder Power Ministry only grew stronger. The more she attended the church, the more she saw things that unsettled her. Each time Prophet Caleb stepped onto the pulpit, the horns on his head gleamed, and the serpent coiled around them swayed as if dancing to his commands. The strangest part was that no one else seemed to notice. The congregation was blind to what she saw. People clapped, sang, and danced, praising the prophet for the miracles, but Nkechi's eyes stayed fixed on the supernatural sight before her. "What else am I not seeing?" she wondered. If no one else can see the horns and the snake, could there be even more secrets hidden in this place? Determined to uncover the truth, she decided she needed to get closer to the prophet. As the weeks went by, Nkechi began noticing patterns. Prophet Caleb had a peculiar routine before and after each service. He always disappeared into a private room for about 30 minutes before coming out to perform miracles. After the service, he would retreat to the same room and stay there until the church was empty. One day, she decided to linger after the service to see what he was doing. Hiding behind a pillar, she watched as Caleb entered the room and locked the door behind him. She couldn't see much, but she heard faint chanting and the sound of something slithering. "This isn't enough," Nkechi thought. "I need solid evidence." The following week she came prepared. Hidden in her bag were small cameras that she had bought for this very purpose. Late one evening, when the church was quiet, she snuck into the building and placed the cameras in strategic spots, inside the prophet's private room, near the pulpit, and in the main office. The next day, she retrieved the footage and braced herself for what she might see. Nkechi's heart pounded as she played the first clip. The camera inside the private room showed Prophet Caleb standing before a small clay pot. He held a long staff in one hand and murmured strange words in a language she couldn't understand. The pot glowed faintly as he spoke, and a shadowy figure appeared briefly behind him. She leaned closer to the screen, her breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" she whispered. In another clip, she saw him walking around the pulpit late at night, sprinkling a dark liquid on the floor and chanting. It was clear now. These rituals were tied to the miracles he performed during services. One Saturday night, Nkechi decided to follow Prophet Caleb after the evening service. She kept her distance, careful not to be seen. To her surprise, he didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a remote part of town and parked in front of a large, eerie-looking house. Nkechi's heart raced as she watched him knock on the door. A tall woman with piercing eyes opened it. Nkechi recognized her immediately. Queen Latifa, a woman rumored to be a powerful occultist. Queen Latifa was a woman who commanded attention and fear. Her presence was overwhelming, and her aura was one of absolute authority. Draped in a flowing red robe adorned with intricate patterns, she exuded a sense of mystery and danger. Her house was dimly lit, with candles flickering on every surface, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The scent of burning herbs filled the air, adding to the ominous atmosphere. It was here that Prophet Caleb found himself every Saturday night, kneeling before the powerful Queen Latifa, the source of his supernatural abilities. She took out her phone and began recording. From her hiding spot, she could only catch bits of their conversation, but it was enough to confirm her worst fears. As Caleb entered the room, he greeted her with a wide smile. "My queen, the great and powerful Latifa, your wonders never fail. I have come to give you the good news." Queen Latifa raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a slight smirk. "Speak, Caleb. What news do you bring me today? My congregation is overflowing. People are coming from far and wide. They say the miracles are unmatched, and testimonies abound. We've even purchased a new piece of land for a bigger church. Your powers have made me untouchable." Queen Latifa listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Finally she spoke, her voice firm and commanding. "Caleb, you must remember the rules. No matter how great your success, you cannot afford to forget them. Power without discipline will lead to ruin." "I know, my queen," Caleb replied quickly. "I follow the rules exactly as you have instructed. I don't take chances." Queen Latifa stood up and walked over to a table where a small calabash sat. She picked it up and turned to face Caleb. "This calabash holds your power. Inside it lies the snake that obeys only you. The snake listens to your incantations and grants the miracles your followers see. But remember, the snake is loyal only as long as you obey the rules." She placed the calabash in Caleb's hands, her eyes narrowing. "The first rule remains. You must never sleep with any woman. Breaking this rule will anger the spirits, and your powers will crumble." Caleb nodded. "Yes, my queen. I remember." "And the second rule," she continued, her tone sharp, "before every service, you must perform the ritual exactly as I taught you. Circle the calabash 3 times, speak the incantation and summon the snake. Only then will the miracles flow." Caleb smirked. "I have not forgotten, my queen. I've done this countless times, and it has never failed me. The church grows stronger every week. Other pastors even come to me, seeking my touch, because they see my power as superior." Queen Latifa leaned closer, her voice low but filled with menace. "Good. But pride is dangerous, Caleb. Do not think for a moment that you are above the rules. Power given can also be taken away." Caleb laughed nervously, trying to hide his unease. "I am always careful, my queen. You don't need to remind me so often." Latifa's eyes darkened, and her tone grew harsher. "I remind you because arrogance is the downfall of many. Do not make me regret giving you this power. You know the consequences of disobedience." Caleb quickly bowed his head. "Forgive me, my queen. I understand." Satisfied, Queen Latifa waved him off. "Oh, prepare for your service tomorrow. And remember, my rules are not suggestions. They are commands." Unknown to both Caleb and Queen Latifa, Nkechi had followed him that night. From a hidden spot outside the house, she recorded everything. The dim light inside the room made it difficult to capture clear footage, but the audio was unmistakable. Through her phone speaker, she could hear Queen Latifa's chilling words and Caleb's eager affirmations. She saw glimpses of the calabash and heard the mention of the snake and the rituals. It all confirmed what she had suspected. The miracles were not divine. Nkechi's heart pounded as she quietly retreated into the shadows. She knew she was treading dangerous territory. If Caleb or Queen Latifa discovered her, the consequences could be deadly. But she couldn't stop now. She was determined to expose the truth, no matter the risk. As Caleb left Queen Latifa's house, he felt invincible. The power he wielded gave him a sense of control over everything. He believed he was untouchable, that nothing could threaten his empire. But in the distance, Nkechi watched him drive away, her mind racing with plans. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but she also knew that the truth had to come out. The storm was coming, and Caleb had no idea that the foundations of his carefully built kingdom were beginning to crack. That night, Nkechi sat in her room, replaying the footage she had captured. Her hands trembled as she realized the depth of Prophet Caleb's deception. The miracles that had drawn thousands to Thunder Power Ministry were not from God. They were the result of dark rituals and unholy alliances. Nkechi felt torn. What do I do with this, she asked herself. If I expose him, will anyone believe me? And what will he do if he finds out I know his secret? She knew she couldn't keep the truth to herself, but she also understood the danger she was in. Prophet Caleb wasn't just a man of power. He was a man who would do anything to protect his secrets. As the weight of her discovery settled on her shoulders, Nkechi realized she had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The only question was whether she would survive the journey she had begun. The following Sunday, Prophet Caleb prepared for his usual service. As was his routine, he slipped away to a secluded room to perform his ritual with the pot and snake. This ritual was the cornerstone of his supposed divine powers, the act that fueled the miracles his congregation celebrated. As Caleb began to chant, he suddenly paused. He felt something, a presence, faint but undeniable. His eyes darted around the dimly lit room, scanning every corner. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice a mixture of authority and fear. Silence. He waited, his heart pounding. After a few minutes, he convinced himself it was nothing. "Maybe I'm just imagining things," he muttered under his breath. Caleb resumed the ritual, murmuring incantations as the snake slithered in and out of the calabash. When he finished, he left the room and stepped into the packed auditorium, ready to deliver his message. The next Sunday, the church was overflowing with worshippers, their hands raised in expectation of miracles. Caleb, dressed in his finest robe, ascended the pulpit with his usual charisma. His voice boomed through the microphone as he declared blessings over the congregation. As he preached, his eyes wandered, scanning the crowd. Then he saw her, Kemi. She was stunning, her skin glowing under the dim church lights, her smile radiant. Caleb's words faltered momentarily before he regained his composure. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "Who is this angel?" he thought. Approaching her pew, he pointed dramatically. "Young lady, stand up," he commanded. Tammy rose to her feet, her heart racing. "The Lord has a special message for you," Caleb declared. "See me after the service." Tammy's face lit up with excitement. "Thank you, Prophet," she replied, her voice trembling with awe. She believed this was a divine moment, a sign that her life was about to change for the better. After the service, Tammy eagerly approached Caleb's office, her mind filled with hope. She knocked softly, and he opened the door, ushering her in with a warm smile. "Please have a seat," he said, his voice gentle. Tammy sat down, clutching her purse nervously. "What message does God have for me, Prophet?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he locked the door. Her heart sank. "Why are you locking the door?" she asked, her voice quivering. Before she could react, Caleb's demeanor changed. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm. Tammy struggled, screaming for help, but the soundproof walls of the office muffled her cries. He overpowered her, ignoring her pleas and tears. When it was over, Caleb pushed her out of the office, his face a mask of anger. "Tell no one," he snarled. "No one will believe you anyway." Tammy stumbled out, tears streaming down her face. She felt broken, humiliated, and betrayed. Tammy confided in some church elders and workers, recounting the horrifying ordeal. But to her dismay, no one believed her. "Why would Prophet Caleb do such a thing?" one elder scoffed. "You're lying to bring him down." "You should be ashamed of yourself," another worker added. "He's a man of God. How dare you accuse him?" Tammy's cries fell on deaf ears. She was shamed into silence, retreating into herself and praying that justice would one day prevail. When Nkechi heard about what happened to Tammy, she was furious. She immediately sought Tammy out and found her crying in a secluded corner of the church compound. "Tammy," Nkechi said softly, kneeling beside her. Tammy looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "No one believes me," she whispered. Nkechi handed her a clean handkerchief. "I believe you," she said firmly. and I promise you I will get to the bottom of this. Caleb's time is running out. Tammy stared at her, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since the incident. Do you mean it? Yes, Nkechi replied. The truth will come out. That Sunday, something unexpected happened during the service. Caleb performed his usual rituals, but the miracles failed. The sick left the church unhealed, and the crowd grew restless. Whispers spread like wildfire. What's going on? Why aren't the miracles working today? Some asked, murmuring. Caleb, desperate to maintain control, tried to preach louder, but the unease in the room was palpable. After the service, he rushed back to his secluded room, grabbed the calabash, and began chanting furiously. Suddenly, the calabash shattered in his hands, its pieces scattering across the floor. The snake was nowhere to be found. Caleb stared at it in shock. No, he muttered, his voice trembling. This can't be happening. Panicked, he drove to Queen Latifa's house that same night. But when he arrived, the house was empty. The doors were locked, the windows boarded up, and the once vibrant garden was now overgrown with weeds. Queen Latifa, he shouted, banging on the door. I need you. There was no answer. She had vanished without a trace. Desperately, he packed a few belongings and prepared to flee. He knew he had to leave that night. His mind raced as he tried to figure out how to escape the consequences of his actions. But just as he was about to leave, there was a knock at the door. His blood ran cold. He opened it to find the police standing there, their stern faces unwavering. Without saying a word, the officers arrested him and led him away. At the station, Caleb initially denied all the allegations. He insisted he was a man of God, that everything had been taken out of context. But when Nkechi entered the room, holding the videos of everything he had done, his rituals, his assaults, his lies, he knew it was over. The truth had come to light, and there was no escaping it. I've done terrible things, Caleb said, his voice cracking. Please forgive me. I've hurt so many people. I didn't know what I was doing. I was lost. But it was too late for apologies. The damage had been done. His reputation was shattered, and his followers, who had once seen him as a holy man, were left in shock. Their beloved prophet, the man they had trusted, was revealed to be nothing more than a fraud who had used dark forces to manipulate them. And Thunder Power Ministry was closed indefinitely. The building, once filled with worshippers, became an empty shell. The community, once united in faith, struggled to rebuild their trust. Tammy, though still healing from her ordeal, found strength in her prayers and support from those who believed her. Nkechi became a hero in the eyes of many. She had risked everything to uncover the truth and stood firm even when no one believed her at first. I didn't do it for fame or recognition, Nkechi told reporters. I did it because people deserve to know the truth. Faith should never be about blind trust in a man. It should always be about seeking God. The story of Prophet Caleb became a cautionary tale. People spoke of it in hushed tones, using it as a reminder to be vigilant and discerning. They learned that not all that glitters is gold and that true faith requires wisdom, not just miracles. Nkechi, now at peace, reflected on her journey. She had faced danger and doubt but never gave up. Through her actions, she reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, the truth has a way of coming to light. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.